Hi, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of The Lunch Bunch. It's episode 68, and we have a very, very, very special guest today. But his name is, well, you might recognize him. Let's see. His name is David Amerland, and he wrote this book called SEO HELP. And it's 20 semantic search steps that will help your business grow. And it's an amazing book. I read it and I loved it. I'm not saying that DeBrown knows him because I do. I read it twice. And there's something about David's books that make me want to read them twice. Maybe because the whole semantic thing is a bit dense for me because I'm not much of a geek. But I found it very easy to understand. And I think each chapter has a to-do list, has a checklist. And they're so practical that you don't actually even have to know what semantic search is, because they're everything you should be doing to get your brand across, to be on social, to get engagement, to be found in search with all this flood of content that we have. So I'm really excited to talk to David and have him join us at the table and have our other bunchers ask some questions and give him some comments. So David, I want to say a quick hello.
Hi, I'm really glad to be here. It's been a year. I can't believe it.
I know.
I've got a little helper today.
It's Nike, right?
It is, yes. And she's happy to be here.
Hello. Okay. Anybody else want to say anything before we start?
Just hi.
Okay.
Yay. Let's go. Maybe you dinner.
Let's go. Okay. So as I was saying, so David was here a year ago, and he had just written Google Semantic Search. It was an incredible book that really introduced semantic search for a lot of people that weren't aware of what it was. We had a great hangout that explained, we kind of focused on what that does, how it relates to businesses, what it means for marketers, because at that time it was still fairly new, the whole concept of semantic search. A year later, now we have a very practical guide and how we can use those principles to do, as I was saying earlier, get your branding across, increase engagement, try to get your content to bubble up, inside of all these other content on search pages. It's very practical, as I said, and it's what I love about it is that if you sit down, I think you should take the book, put it on your desk, and every day check off something that he suggests that you do. Because the semantic part of it is basically the web wanting to know who you are and what you do everywhere on the web. That's basically all you need to know about semantic. So it's all about consistency, your brand, making sure you are you, that you stand out as an individual, and getting your identity across. So that Google, when Google indexes the little spiders across all the web, they know who you are. And they say, hey, I know this guy. He wrote this over here, you know. So David, my first question to you is SEO. I sort of came up with this SSO thing, this semantic search optimization, because we really do need another acronym. Because I did that for two reasons. One, yeah, to be a bit funny, but secondly, because I think search optimization is semantic. I mean, if you want to optimize your chances of being found, you have to go by those guidelines of what we just sort of discussed, and maybe you can go into that a bit more. But I'll ask you this question. I listened to a podcast. It's a favorite podcast of mine, Marketing Companion, with Mark Schaefer and Tom Webster. And there was an article in Ad Age that said that companies are increasing their SEO budgets every year. And this last year, there was a huge bump. They almost doubled it. I think it was not doubled. Okay, there was like maybe a 50% increase. And I think that's interesting that people are going back to SEO when we've been talking about content and marketing, content marketing a lot over the last year. So can I ask you, why do you think that is?
Well, there are several layers here, so I'll start unpacking them. Before we go to semantic search, we used to have a lot of vertical layers in marketing that could be addressed and looked at individually. So your content, for instance, impacted a little bit on your SEO, but not so much unless it contained specific keywords. Your PR had absolutely almost zero to do with it unless it gave you some links, and it didn't always do that. Your branding had absolutely nothing to do with search because it was branding, it was marketing. And semantic search basically destroys the silos, creates transparency, begins to unite all the different layers. It begins to join the dots, essentially. And it does that because it is predicated upon identity, which means you have to be an individual, which is recognized by specific attributes, which has specific characteristics, and it takes a lot of work to actually create that. So essentially, all those things have to work together, almost in tandem, certainly within a certain degree of harmony. And that's where that increase in budget comes in. Although it is apportioned to search, because companies still traditionally apportion budgets to very specific inline charge items. When it comes to actually how you use it, well, you use it for content creation, you use it for branding perhaps, you use it for a PR effort which leads to engagement in the social web, which then leads to something else, which leads to links and content being looked at. So we are in a period of diffusion in the sense of what we do, and also unification, which is refreshing because it makes a challenge for a small business the same as for a large business. And although people say, big businesses have it easy, they have the budgets, they have the manpower, you say yes, but they can't move quickly. And there are problems with that because they still have a PR department that doesn't talk to marketing, a marketing department that doesn't talk to branding people that don't talk to customer service, and all of those departments basically talk to customers with different voices. And that's where you get the kind of disconnect in terms of identity, which means that trust isn't there, and if trust isn't there, well, you don't get a business. So it's that simple. So a small business can actually achieve more with less, a lot easier than a large one, because of this.
So so why do you think then that businesses are going back? They're depending on traditional SEO methods to be found in search, as opposed to taking advantage of these semantic things in terms of uniqueness and branding and content quality. Is it because they just lack the vision, or is it because it's easier to lift the hood on the car and play with the mechanics?
Well, there are several answers to that question, and really depends on the context. We mustn't forget that the semantic web is still scaling. We're still in the early days, despite the fact that we're 2 years plus in. And we don't see the same effect, cause and effect, in every market vertical. There are still specific markets where if you just stick to very traditional SEO right now, it will still work well enough for you to be able to justify it. There are other markets where it doesn't. And companies never change unless they absolutely have to, because that's the way we operate. So until they see a change which gives them diminishing returns, they won't do that. We must also realize that because now we have the social element mixed into search, and there are social media and social optimization budgets being allocated to social media teams, we still tend to use the traditional language of ROI when it comes to social, and it doesn't really compute there, because you may have a social media team, or you may, for a small business, you may yourself be spending a lot of time doing social media activities, getting engagement, creating brand recognition. But then you say, okay, how many sales have I made? And the answer is usually so few, if any, that it is very hard to quantify. But if you look, yes, I was going to say, is there a question?
Yes. You said that Google Plus is the only viable shortcut left to you on the semantic web. And, my question really is, because I deal with this on a daily basis, why do you think there's so much resistance?
Well, because as an instrument, or as a tool, which is essentially what Google Plus is, it's not intuitive. If you go to Facebook and you're new to Facebook, within a day or two, you know how to use it. If you come into Google Plus, it may take you a month plus to begin to become familiar with it, before you begin to realize what it actually gives you back in terms of your time. So it has a lot of dense layers to it, and it takes time to unpack, and that creates an immediate resistance threshold for anybody who thinks, I'm going to come in, it's easy adoption, I'm familiar with the social media web, I know what I'm doing. And the answer to that, no, you don't within Google Plus. It is very complex. You need to take time to actually invest in it. And the other thing is that Google Plus resists automation. Companies that successfully use social media, and they're called social media companies, or they're called social companies, they automate a lot of their activities. And Google Plus can't, you can't do that, because we can sense it, we can see it, you can see if the response times are not there, or the responses are zero, and we resist being broadcast to. And also within Google Plus, what counts is a relationship, or the relational connection, which means relationship building, which is really difficult to do as a brand. So if you're going to do it as a brand, either you need to adopt a very human voice, which is really difficult, or you need to use your personnel to drive eyeballs to the brand, create a kind of connection, and then it begins to take off. And again, a lot of the companies don't actually have the kind of strategy or flexibility even in place to actually do that. So we're still in the very early days of the social web as a relationship building platform. It's still being used as a cheaper alternative to mass broadcasting, which is what most companies are familiar with.
I'm going to ask you one question before I give it to the rest of the panel, because I don't want to hog the show. Do you think then that it would be an advantage for smaller businesses who can't compete with the big brands and those big SEO bucks to really consider these strategies that you point out in your book in terms of semantic web? Would that be helpful for them to compete?
Yes. I mean, one of the things which I see, I'm sort of caught in between two worlds, because I work primarily with very large brands, and I see the problems they face. I get back the data they have from the strategies we implement, and I see what works. And then everybody else I come in contact with works in a small business world environment, and the problems they present me with are almost a microscopic scale of the macroscopic problems that big businesses have. So when I crafted the questions, I crafted them in a way that will help anybody. They're immensely customizable in terms of they actually fit very precisely to what you're doing. So whether you have a small business or whether you're running a large company, you will benefit equally from going through them and actually doing that due diligence where you answer those questions honestly. You really do the soul searching required. You join all the dots in terms of the data that's required to be put in, and then you begin to actually get a sense of what you really are doing.
I'm going to bring up this comment from Nazim. So Nazim says the level of complexity on Google Plus is a big turnoff for my clients and friends, and I think both BL and I and everybody on this panel can attest that we've heard that complaint before. I just want to say before we move on to the next question is that I welcome you to this. David Amerland is a tweet generator. I mean, he has all these like beautiful little tweetable quotes. So by all means, use the hashtag #ReadLunchBunch and tweet them out there and share the wisdom. So who has got another question for David?
Not a
Well, I like.
Jess?
Okay, I like some of the things that you were saying about voice and some of the complexities where the larger the company, it's a different kind of voice issue than it is with a smaller company, yet we all seem to have issues with voice regardless of our size. So when you are out there and you're looking at all of the data and you're seeing all of these things, are there obvious discrepancies that whether we're acting as ourselves, building an identity, or we're supporting our brand and we're building that identity, are there things that are obvious gaps that we tend to miss that we could immediately start honing in on after this conversation and say, hey, these are a couple of things that David sees a lot. If I'm doing them, I can make a change right now.
Yes, there are. And in one word, and both large companies and even individuals acting as a brand, the gaps which they face comes down to resonance. And basically what it is we're quite happy conversing on a person-to-person basis. We say nice things, we are interesting, and even if we express an opinion, it doesn't matter what kind of opinion it is always fascinating because it gives us the opportunity to get into somebody else's head and see how they see the world and how they think, and that makes it fascinating and addictive. Ask now somebody to say, okay, now you're also projecting a brand. And immediately what happens, 9 times out of 10, shutters come down, poker face, and you start talking like this. And you think, why does that happen? Why? Because we've been conditioned for so long to think that brand value is something big and distant and glitzy and sort of really, really faceless in many ways. That has to be that way so it can't be challenged. And we've become comfortable dealing like that, and it shouldn't be that way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a brand sometimes questioning itself, like, is there real value in what I'm doing? Because I bet you any amount of money, most of its target audience is also at some point thinking the very same thing. So this is how you build up a conversation of real shared values. We mustn't forget that everything that happens online is a conversation, and that takes a sort of bi-directional approach with give and take, so two people exchange ideas, even if it's a brand and its audience. And then it becomes co-creational, because you're not just broadcasting, you're developing something which is common to you. And if you do that, that's where the relationship actually comes from. You know, if you talk to a brand or a person and you go away thinking something new, that contact has changed you. And by being changed by it, you're also somehow bound to it. That's how relationships begin to form, and that's how they develop, and that's how you get, in a company or a business, brand loyalty. You think, they're cool guys. Well, what makes them cool? It's not the logo, it's not their advertising, that's just money. It's basically that connection in how they create an emotional response to you, which is where the resonance comes from. So to answer more pithily to your question, it is, yeah, be yourself at a very real level, which means that at some point you have to be able comfortably to express a certain degree of vulnerability, because that's what actually allows us to respond more honestly and openly to people. And to show you how vulnerability works in a business context, let's consider something which is really faceless and big and massive, like Amazon, which has automated algorithms dealing with people. Okay, here's how Amazon begins to make itself vulnerable so it can humanize its business. If you try and buy something from it, which you already have bought before, it tells you, you've bought this item before. An algorithm tells you that. But what happens in that instant? Well, Amazon wants to make sales. So really, if you want to buy it again, it's your business. It doesn't care. If it's your mistake, well, it's your mistake. They sold it to you. But really, they're prepared to say, hey, we were not going to make this sale because you forgot and you bought it, and here's our reminder of it. And in that instant, you begin to think, hey, that's a cool thing because it saved me $10, for instance, which I would have spent again. So they go into that length of trouble to actually humanize the facelessness of their contact, which creates a vulnerability on their part, which allows you to then feel that emotional response to Amazon. And the other thing, of course, is, yeah?
Sorry, that happened to me the other day.
Yeah.
But, and that was really, very helpful to me.
Yeah, you feel good about it.
But try and find a human when you have a problem at Amazon. You cannot. So
I totally agree with you. See, this is the thing. And here's the other thing. You're right. They haven't got the human contact, but they make up for it in other ways. For instance, they have an unequivocal returns policy. So you think, okay, I bought a pair of shoes, I don't like the color, whatever, you send it back, right? A bit of a hassle, but it just goes back. They're willing to take that chance. Because they're willing to take that chance, and they're more vulnerable to the purchase or the transactional process than I am, who's giving them money, then I am more willing to give them money because I trust them more. So the trust threshold is higher, is sort of lower in terms of my willingness to trust them. And that creates a connection. Again, they go into those extremes to automate the humanity in terms of vulnerability, if you like, which sounds like a paradox, but that's the way it works with people. Now think, if we apply the same principle to a small business, well, a small business that's so open and resonant to its audience has a really loyal following, and there's arguably a greater humanity, the connection there, because it's not as automated.
If we're talking about automating humanness, as you were saying, that's just good business practice, right? The things that you're describing is a competitive advantage if you do that and you take care of your clients and not be that sort of greedy, oh, you made a mistake, it's your problem. But how do you, if as a business, personalize the company? Because you mentioned this a lot in the book about giving a company an identity, a person. So even a small company that doesn't have that many people, say 25, 50 staff, how do you decide who is the human face of that company? How do you get that face out there?
Well, when it comes to actually choosing somebody to be the human face of that company, it has to be, I suppose, in a small company, the people who are perhaps better suited to doing it, or most willing to do it, or willing to step up. But even if we talk about large companies, we talk about Virgin, for instance, we always think instantly of Richard Branson because he's the face of an incredibly large company that's actually global. And yet he's the guy who actually steps up and has become its voice and face. But beyond that, if we take Virgin as an example, the entire company, in all its different facets, in all its different business verticals, reflects the same amount of irreverence and practicality that he does. So it's informed by his philosophy, which means that before they even set it up, they actually sit down and think, what do we really want to be like? Yes, we do telephone services. Yes, we do ISP. Yes, we sell mobile phones. Yes, we sell flights and tickets. But at the same time, we do it in a very specific way. And they work it out in all the details. And that's exactly the same amount of thinking that a business has to actually get involved into, even if it's a small business, because you've got to say, what is it that makes me different? And the moment you realize that, then that informs your every decision. It informs your every marketing plan. It informs the way you move forward into the future and the goals you set. And that begins to become your voice, to come back to Jess's question earlier on how difficult a voice is. Well, there you go. It comes from all those things.
And so it's values. And then when we're talking about small companies, and I'm saying we encompassing, we as small company tend to think of ourselves as our brand. And I think that that's a little bit dangerous when we think about semantic web, because we need to be different from our brand. So we have an identity and our business has an identity, and we can have some of that, they can play off of each other, and my business, the leader of my business, can play a part in rallying around what the business does as much as my customers. It's kind of an interesting thing that we get to work on and feel through.
And I think that also shows a kind of chicken and egg question, right? Because you think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you do business with, we are actually dealing with people, and people love dealing with people. So, if you've got a small business, it's actually made up of people, and those people as individuals have specific values, specific voices, specific personalities, and they need to be reflected in the business. They don't change just because they go into it. Like, for instance, Virgin doesn't, as a massive conglomerate, is almost Richard Branson. You almost think that he's a guy behind the keyboard. Actually sends you a message on your ISP and says, "Hey, dude," because they talk like that. You seem to have downloaded more gigabytes than you used last time. So do you want us to up the plan or something like that? And they actually talk in that way when they send you a message. Well, you think, that's reflective of values which resonate throughout the company, which means good internal communication, good training, and they also resonate with us at a very human level, which means they've actually got it, they worked it out. And in order for that to be sustainable, it has to be fulfilling when you actually do it, because you can't keep on doing something you hate and think that it's going to work every time. So it has to be something people like.
So
I'm going to roll this back into the SSO thing.
Yep.
Because I want to talk about, you said, and we hear this all the time, right? You have to be awesome, and you said the way to get your content found it can't suck. First of all, I'd like to ask you what kind of content sucks. Define suck. And well, let's go there. What kind of content sucks?
Let's begin with that. And we all know the kind of content that sucks. It's the kind of content that basically is going to waste your 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes that you've given it, to the point that you're going to say, well, that's 3 minutes I'm not going to get back. And the moment that happens, what happens next? Well, you lose confidence in the person who wrote it, you lose confidence and trust in the person who shared it, and you're highly unlikely to want to go back to the same sources to consume any kind of content again, simply because it was a waste of your time. And that's just the kind of content that's been created for purely marketing purposes, or purely PR purposes, or purely SEO purposes, simply to get some eyeballs or somebody to tell you how great they are. Well, you're not interested in that. Whenever we read something, we always want to know, what's in it for us? I'm going to invest my time and attention, which is very limited because there are only 24 hours in a day, and I need to get something back. Content that gives you something back is content that doesn't suck. Some content is absolutely awesome. It completely changes the way you see everything. And some content simply is functional. You want to know how to do something, or you want to learn something about something, and it does that. As long as it gives you something, yes.
You talk about creating content with a search-based query, and that was unclear to me. Can you give an example of what that means?
Yeah, I mean, we used to use search for keywords, and the keyword used to be, for instance, I don't know, mobile phones. And you think, okay, what I need is, I need 500 words with the word mobile phones mentioned 15 times. And that used to be sort of the content that was very thin and very poor in terms of quality. And now we've gone into search queries which say, for instance, what's the best cell phone for me? And the criteria for that are going to be different for everybody. I mean, if you ask me that question, I absolutely right now don't know what is the best cell phone for me. Maybe the one I have now is not the best choice I could have made. There may be some criteria I don't know about. So if you can actually create an article which allows somebody to learn what's the best cell phone for them, how to balance their needs and budgets and technology and the future, suddenly you've created something which is a lot more viable in terms of content. It will resonate with the audience, it will give value to anybody who reads it, and it will create a lot more traffic and visibility than just keywords on their own would have.
So instead of keywords, you're saying to include a question? What are you saying to include?
If you think of your audience, whatever you do, your audience has questions about it. So if you start with a list of questions that your audience has, and then you create content that answers those questions comprehensively, the way you would as a person, if they were to stand in front of you and ask you, that's the best way to go forward with it.
Do you think then that do we have to write list blogs and how-to blogs, that type of thing, exclusively to be consistent and to be useful?
Well, I think every time we write, it has to be useful now. You can't just write for writing's sake like we used to in the past, because we used to write drivel, and it doesn't work anymore. And if anything, poor content now backfires because it begins to associate yourself and your brand in the eyes of people and in the eyes of search with poor quality. And that means you are not going to surface where you should, you're not going to get as many eyeballs as you should, and you won't get the visibility you expect. So yes, every time you write something, you should be guided by the question, why am I writing it for? Followed closely by, who am I writing it for? And those two inform the content, the depth, the quality, the voice, the time it takes to actually create it, which is a good guide to have.
I'm going to write because that's good. Because Scott, I was just going to go to you. Okay.
Well, that's all fine. Thank you, Ray. That's all fine and dandy. But isn't there a point where there's saturation? Once that article has been written, then it's out there. And then if I'm coming by and I want to write something, I've got to find something new. At a particular point, doesn't incumbency give an inherent advantage to people who've already done it, and latecomers just are going to miss the boat?
Well, yes and no. Let's see that, because your question is spot on. You're asking, if that's the guideline I'm going to take and I'm going to answer those questions, then obviously, if 1,000 people have done the same job before me and they've got content that covers it, whatever I'm going to say is only going to be redundant. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning where we said you need to define who you are and why you do what you do. If you do that, then you need to define the difference. What's different about you? Are you doing things exactly the same as those 1,000 other businesses? Well, if that's the case, you've got a hard sell, because why should anyone come to you? But if you're doing something differently, well, great. Let's see what you do differently. This is what I want you to show me. And at the same time, if somebody has written content which you also want to write, link to them and say, there's a really cool article which comprehensively answers this, and it's there. And send somebody there to perhaps your competitor. But at the same time, they've done the job, right? And not acknowledging them is silly, because if I do a search, they will come up. I will find them on my own. The very fact that you're confident enough to link me to your competitor sometimes makes me think that, hey, that's really cool. That was a cool thing to do. I like that. And this is how it becomes very nuanced at a very human level. So we go through now what I call a period of humanization of marketing, where we still market in terms of, we need to tick all the boxes, we need to have the content, we need to have the links, we need to have the technically authoritative content and style. But at the same time, I need to see that human contact, that human attitude. And if that isn't there, if I'm getting a sense that you're really hard selling to me behind a facade, I resist any kind of connection and I move away. And that's a very human response. So really, don't be afraid to have that kind of vulnerability, to have that kind of human connection, and make your content relevant to who you are.
I've just, about 5 minutes ago, and we usually break for the takeout, so we missed that, but I think there's been lots of takeaways so far. One that I'm going to share, and this thing is important. It's important to understand, because sometimes semantic search can be confusing, and really it all boils down to letting the web understand who you are and what you do. And everything, all the points that David makes in his book is all the tactics that you can use to do that, to isolate your identity, make sure you stand out, be unique, be awesome. And there's so many more questions I would love to ask David. I wish we had more time because oh no, I'm not going to do it. I was going to ask you another question. So we're going to leave it at that. I do have a takeout. We have time for a very quick takeout, and I'll edit it later. First of all, I would like to leave you with. I'll leave a link in the event page, and that's basically it's a bit of a cheat. It's my blog post following David's first appearance, because it goes into semantic search and how it relates to businesses and marketers. So I'll leave that link there. And the takeaway I took from the book, something I did not know, and I know there are a lot of web geeks out there that are going to laugh at me for doing this, but I did not know that Google sees dashes and marks underscores as different things. I didn't know that. I think so cool. It's like for instance, if you use a dash, like as David's examples, help my SEO. So help dash my dash SEO. Google sees that as 3 separate words. But if you use underscores, Google sees that as help my SEO as 1 word.
One word, yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Something. There you go. That's my takeaway. Jess, you had one?
I did. I'm bringing a book, because I love to read, called The Education of Millionaires. And as I was thinking about this and preparing, one of the things that became very clear to me is whether it's a 1-person organization or a 100,000-person organization, there are so many voices, and there are things that we all need to know to do our job well in a world where we can play in the physical place and we can play online, since it's kind of all the same these days. And the Education of Millionaires gives 6 or 7 different areas to be super knowledgeable about, and to be able to help each other in different departments, to be able to help each other across your industry, and really add value, which adds to your voice, which can add to the things you write about, which can add to the connections that you make, everything if you follow everything David says to do in his book.
If you're not a millionaire, can you read it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Become a millionaire by reading
Make your first million.
So, okay. It's not a textbook for millionaires, it's a textbook to become a millionaire. I got it. Anyone else have a takeout before we sign out?
Sure,
Scott?
I do. And everyone knows I'm all about video, and I'll be real quick with this. David just happened to write the Google Plus Hangouts for business, and I thought that would make a good addition to the program
Totally.
today.
Because he has a great chapter on video, actually, and he actually says, I think, video. Here I am quoting him as if he's not even here. David, you said.
You're awesome, Ray.
you said that video is a shortcut, right?
It is, absolutely. Yes.
And it's something that everybody's been talking about, certainly this year. Video is everything. It takes a little more work, I think, but it means some people can't. Some people can't.
Yeah.
So,
I think when it comes to creating an identity, a voice, authenticity, trust, a very human contact, video is unbeatable. I mean, case in point, what we're doing right here. We could have done this over email. We can do it through perhaps blog posts. It would take us X amount of months to actually even get to know each other. And here you immediately cut straight to the chase. You can begin to appreciate and assess what the other person says, and you appreciate the context of it and the verbal clues that go with it.